I've always loved science fiction, and Robert Heinlein has always been one of my all-time favorite authors. I first read his book, Stranger in a Strange Land, which was published in 1961 when I was a teenager. If you're not familiar with it, Stranger in a Strange Land tells the story of Valentine Michael Smith, a man that Heinlein postulates in early adulthood who arrives to Earth after being born on the planet Mars and being raised by Martians absent any human contact. Kind of a recasting, if you will, of Kipling's Jungle Book. This book had a big impact on me as a teenager when I first read it. And as I became an adult and began to still resonate with the concepts in Stranger in a Strange Land, and certainly as I moved into my profession in executive search, several concepts in that book really stood out for me. They were novel at their time. The book, again, was published in 1961, but they really made their way into the vernacular of our culture. One of these, a word that you might have heard, is grok. In fact, it became a dictionary definition, and today it's more commonly used in the world of software coders. The other concept was something that was called a fair witness. That hasn't had the same inroad into common usage as grok, but it's equally fascinating. Both of these concepts, by the way, part of the fascination of them is that they have their roots in different cultures. Grok was a Martian word and concept, and fair witness was a fictional profession that Heinlein postulated existed on Earth in his book Stranger in a Strange Land. Yet despite their origins in these different worlds, Heinlein's two inventions are actually related at a deep level. They've also had an influence on how I look at life, and in particular, I believe, are relevant for anyone who's committed to really build and maintain a high-performance team today. So let's look at these two concepts. In Heinlein's concept, grok was a Martian word that in a certain sense was untranslatable into English, given the completeness of its definition. A rather simplistic and one-dimensional definition of grok was to drink. However, Heinlein envisioned a Martian society and culture where, given the scarcity of water on the planet, the act of drinking water actually took on spiritual connotations. Drinking water was synonymous with merging your body with water. The water became part of the drinker, and the drinker part of the water. Separate realities were merged and entangled. To grok, then, was far more than to drink. It meant that you knew and understood something so completely. You understood what it was, what it wasn't, what it is, what it could be, what it could not be. At that level of so complete and holistic understanding that you and that thing that you were understanding became one with each other. That meant to grok. Fair witness, on the other hand, was an individual on Earth who had been trained to observe events and report exactly what he or she saw and heard. No extrapolations, no assumptions, no conclusions, just observations. As such, a fair witness was an absolutely reliable and unimpeachable source of information. In fact, in Heinlein's world that he postulates on Earth, fair witnesses are used in courts to provide a completely impartial recounting of what occurred. They could be counted on to communicate what was there, not what they thought was there. What wasn't there, or what they believed should be there, or what they believed wanted to be there, but the exact characteristics and specifications of what was present and observable with absolutely no bias or prejudice. Interesting concepts. In my own search practice, I've really striven to exemplify the characteristics of a fair witness, particularly when I interview candidates. I notice my own biases and preformed opinions and see that they actually rear their head from the moment I look at a resume, even before I am in front of a candidate interviewing a candidate. And I've learned over time that these biases quite often stop me from being present to what a candidate says. When this happens and I'm stopped, I'm more focused on really fitting what the candidate is saying into my preformed thoughts and opinions. And as a result, I can miss key information and then can find that I'm really listening even more to my internal dialogue and my assessment of what the candidate is saying and my attempts at fitting the candidate and what the candidate says into these preformed opinions and biases. I'm paying more attention to that than I'm paying to what the candidate is saying. Now, interestingly, in the context of the medical profession, there was a book that was written several years ago by Dr. Jerome Groopman called How Doctors Think, that absolutely explores these same tendencies, but in the context of medical diagnostics. And Groopman really does a masterful job of laying out the different avenues that doctors go down and mistaken routes that doctors go down in misdiagnosing and assessing a patient. And several of those biggest kind of impediments to accurate medical diagnosis are doctors bringing their biases and their preformed opinions when conducting a medical assessment. And as a result of that, missing key elements that are present with that candidate that would give an accurate diagnosis, not candidate, with the patient, give an accurate diagnosis to that patient's condition. Fascinating book, How Doctors Think. Assessing candidates is very similar to that. When you recognize your biases and your preformed opinions, you're actually freer to observe what is actually there. You can then bring greater discernment and understanding to a candidate. You're hearing what's being said instead of what you think should be said. You're hearing then what might be missing in what a candidate is saying. In fact, you can hear what a candidate is struggling to say, and sometimes even what they don't know how to say or that they can't say. So you are able to develop a more complete and holistic understanding of that individual. And to borrow from Heinlein, you are able to grok the candidate. Interestingly, when I see executives and interviewing teams do this, recognize their biases, their preformed opinions, and develop a more complete and holistic understanding of a candidate as a result of that, I see that they're also bringing life to the spirit and intent of the title of Heinlein's book. Remember, the main character in A Stranger in a Strange Land joins a group of people who, while sharing core values, nonetheless have very different life experiences. Of course, given the background and experience of the book's protagonist, the fact that he was raised on Mars by Martians, he has the most different life experiences of them all. But by the end of the book, that main character is a fully integrated and functional member of the group of people that he becomes a part of. And that group is by far better as a result of that character joining them. Similarly, in my search practice, I found that companies naturally move on to the ramp to higher performance when executives and interviewing teams are more open to someone who has different viewpoints, experiences, and worldviews, instead of hiring someone who looks, sounds, and behaves like them. However, this is really the exception rather than the norm. And unfortunately, too many CEOs and executive teams are really blind to the degree to which they allow their biases to influence their observations and their thinking when interviewing a candidate. As a result, I see over and over again that CEOs and executive teams don't take the time in an interview to understand a candidate at a deep level. They completely miss key information and instead impose their preformed ideas as really the dominant lens when looking at who to hire. Interestingly, you also see this even how jobs are defined. Hence, rarely is someone hired who, while being a stranger, and to borrow from Heinlein, would nonetheless create a richer and more diverse environment in which all would benefit. Interestingly, this happens particularly when an organization knows they need something they don't currently have. Whether it is an attempt to bolster the diversity of their workforce and bring on minority or diverse candidates that aren't present, or whether it's to move to a different level, whether they see that they have been sales model and a business model that is focused on small, medium enterprises, and now they need to move to larger enterprise selling, or they want to enter into a vertical market which they don't have a lot of familiarity. Um, and regardless of what is said or committed to, I see over and over again that interviewing teams default to hiring people who look, sound, and act the same as them. Great candidates are ruled out often because of feedback from team members who don't really understand that in order to move beyond where they are today, they need to hire someone who does not look like them today. These companies end up then building their leadership teams with people who are really homogenous to their culture. And much to their detriment, things pretty much stay the same. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some progress, but they're much ballyhooed attempt at changing their culture and delivering that sought after hockey stick of rate of growth. Instead, results in pretty much the same culture and nominal top line improvements in revenue. However, the smartest CEOs know that in order to get there from here, you can't do what got to you to where you are today. They know that when interviewing, hiring, and building out their leadership teams, they need to notice natural biases and preformed opinions and really be open to embracing the stranger in a strange land.